they were trying to downplay it, like, oh no, it wasn't a school shooting. It was a domestic dispute that went bad. I'm like,
oh, that was that. Yeah, they said that was a parent coming to get his kid, right? And it was part of a.
And it very well may have been, but as we all know, all school shootings start with
hold on one second.
Incident.
Right.
We're about to go live.
Welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Oh, another episode for our farmers out there across the world, over 100 countries.
Yes.
Almost 2 million listeners.
Yes.
We're very excited to bring you look, we've got a great guest today, Jeff.
We do.
He's a very bright man. He's got a very interesting background, former naval intelligence officer, and a gentleman who graduated from Temple University and went against his parents' wishes, I think, politically. They were both Democrats, from what I understand, and started the college Republican group there, and has done many other things, works in broadcasting, has a double major in political science and broadcast journalism. Very, very bright guy. A lot of fun to talk to. I'm guessing this is going to be a very interesting show. Jack Posobiec, thank you for being here, sir.
What's going on, Pat? Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff, for having me tonight. Happy to be here.
Without a doubt, man. Plenty to talk about, man. There's so much going on in the world of politics. It's just seems like every day since Mr. Donald Trump's gotten to office, it's just been a new just slice of political theater. And we have no shortage of stuff to talk about, man. Pat, where are we going today, man? Let's do it.
Well, off the air, we were talking, Jack, you were talking about a story out in the Northwest regarding an Antifa gentleman attempting to shoot up a school. I believe he was killed by police officers, was he not?
That's exactly right. He was killed by police officers, and while it doesn't necessarily look like the shooting itself was politically motivated, it seemed to have been more of a personal incident that went bad. This was a guy who is a member of a far-left organization called United Front, involved in numerous activist activities with this group, a lot of protests, brings a loaded firearm into a school, 9mm, extra mags, has got other stuff in the vehicle, and the situation, fortunately, was stopped by police officers before it could spill out of control. Now, keep in mind, what blew my mind about this is that the video has just been released by police now, and that's why it's kind of getting back up. This happened a week before the March for Life, where the Covington Catholic students had been wrongfully accused of racism and everything else. National media, mainstream media, completely downplayed. They buried this story. Yeah. Meanwhile, you can look at the T-shirt that the gentleman is wearing. It actually has a "Smash the Patriarchy" T-shirt on it, which is this left-wing conspiracy theory that that men are sort of colluding to control the world and to put down all the women and all the
toxic masculinity.
That's the thing that I can't figure out with the mental illness going on. Jack, maybe you can add to this, but you see this shirt on this guy about the matriarchy. Here's a white guy wearing the shirt. And he's wearing this shirt, and we're seeing a lot of white liberals saying all white people should die. I go, what? How mentally ill do you have to be to say that your race should be eliminated from the planet? What is going on with these people?
It's definitely something that needs to be studied, and I will say that this is a great example, and I bring this up a lot, of why I support the reopening and refunding of America's mental health institutions.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I remember when Reagan, and we'll just say it how it is, Reagan was, he was the guy that played a big part in getting rid of our mental institutions. I remember as a kid, we used to have a lot of them around the Quad Cities where I live here in the Iowa, Illinois area. And after Reagan, we suddenly noticed a lot of folks walking around the streets that were a lot more homeless, a lot more mentally ill people, walking around, and so it's definitely gotten to be a serious epidemic in this country.
Yeah, believe it or not, it's actually the movie of all things, 1976 movie,
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
right? Jack Nicholson and Nurse Ratched and all. You can actually track back the just in terms of public opinion, the views on mental institutions. You can track it back to that movie being the catalyst and the turning point for just everyone kind of getting up in arms and saying, we don't want to fund this stuff anymore. This is not the right way to do it. We need to cut it. And of course, government's going to look at that and say, hey, you don't want us to spend money on something? Great, we're not going to spend money on something.
Didn't Geraldo Rivera do I'm sorry.
Oh, and just to finish the thought, they shut it all down without a plan of what comes next.
Right.
I remember Geraldo Rivera did a story in the 80s about Willowbrook or Walbrook. One of those two I know was in the Rain Man, but the actual place that he went in there and just found just how absolutely terrible conditions were in some of these mental facilities. But yeah, it's definitely obviously been an issue, letting people out on the streets who probably shouldn't be.
So let's talk. I mean, you had mentioned Covington. Let's talk a little bit about that, because the minute I saw that, I saw a kid standing there with a "Make America Great Again" hat on, just smiling, and his classmates around him, and a man beating a drum in his face, and instantly they paint the picture that these kids are white supremacists and getting in this poor indigenous Vietnam veteran's face and trying to instigate problems and everything else. When you pan back and you see the Israelites group throwing out racial slurs against these kids and all the other chaos that was going on at that time on those monument steps, you get a totally different picture of what actually went down.
What's really interesting about the Covington Catholic incident, I've been calling it Covington Gate because I think that's what we should call it, and is that everything about it was a lie.
Yeah.
Other than, I guess, the ethnicities and the ages of the two people in the video, right? That initial video that came out. Everything else was a complete lie. They lied about who started it. They lied about the context. Mm-hmm. They lied about what was even being said. And I think that for me was the sort of the dog that didn't bark, in a sense, use the Shakespearean phrase, because initially the video that went viral, the first video that went viral of this incident, we've all seen multiple videos now, but the very first video that was posted was silent. It had been muted. Someone had physically gone in and taken out the audio of this video.
Right.
Then the gentleman got up and started saying that the kids were chanting "Build the Wall." And I said, well, wait a minute. What if they took the audio out because they knew it didn't corroborate what he was saying in his interview? And this guy, believe me, he instantly he's on CNN with a sit-down interview. He's got in New York Times, he's got an interview. Washington Post, he's got an interview. It seems like he's all over the internet all at once. Whereas these kids are trying to get their story out, and they're reaching out to me on Twitter. They're reaching out to other people on Twitter saying, Jack, this isn't what happened. How come nobody wants to interview us? They didn't even reach out to get the other side of the story.
Yeah, you're right. And Amanda Guthrie on NBC talking to here's her intro with Phillips says, "Hello, Mr. Phillips. How are you doing? How are you feeling?" And then she's talking to the kid from Covington going, "Don't you feel you owe someone an apology for standing there? For standing?" I thought, how stupid these people look. And there's people out there, yet millions of people out there watching NBC buying the narrative.
Well, that day, I mean, you saw it was real time. You saw people freaking out at this video that was played, like you said, Jack and Pat, completely out of context. And we talk about this all the time on the show, whether it's what we call mockingbird media or the weaponization of media. That day was a perfect example of how the media can weaponize it's somewhat of a benign situation and completely invert the narrative to get. I mean, everyone was going off. Even the Covington principal was like, "We're going to expel him," just going off the original context.
But Jack, I want your feedback on this, and this is a very specific thing. A much bigger picture here is that there is going to be a massive lawsuit against media for slandering and slamming these kids and dragging these kids through the mud. Is this the moment that turns and changes media history to where now the media has to actually be accurate and held accountable.
Good luck.
I'm telling you, if it's a big enough lawsuit, which I think it's going to be, I think that media is going to have to start saying to themselves, wait a minute, we're now being held accountable financially.
Right.
What do you think about that?
This absolutely has the potential for being that kind of flashpoint. Covington Gate is already the focus of multiple lawsuits. And I have been in contact with one of the lead lawyers on this, Robert Barnes. He's absolutely someone you should have on your show, by the way. Not trying to do your booking for you, but
no, that's all right. Robert Barnes.
He has time. He's amazing to talk to. So he's putting together this. He's got numerous members, not only of the families who were involved in the video, but also even alumni of the school, people who have been affected on this because now their ties to the school has affected their professional reputation and affected their ability to operate in the professional world. And so they've reached out as well to him. And so what the media has been able to do for so long, right, is to just spread fake news and lie about people, because unfortunately libel laws in America are very, very, very loose. They're very loose. And for someone who is a public figure to win a defamation case or even get it close enough to winning so that there'll be a settlement is very, very, it's a very high bar. It's a very high standard. However, in this situation, these kids were private citizens. They were not attempting to seek fame. They weren't doing anything other than marching against abortion,
right?
Going out and doing some conservative activism, and which is perfectly legal First Amendment activity, regardless of your feelings on the abortion issue. And they were targeted and smeared, and so the standard is actually lower. If the media did not take the time to do due diligence and receive and actually look to see if there was more context on this, then they're going to be liable, and they are going to have to pay big money in this case. And what's amazing is actually, as I was talking to another friend of mine who's a Georgetown lawyer, and he said, Jack, I've been reading the articles that the media outlets have posted as corrections, or but they always call it like, here's what they do. They say, well, we're not correcting our original reporting. We're just updating it because we've now seen a new video that has more context.
Which is just
that's kind of wishy-washy. But what the lawyer said was, Jack, that's them admitting that they were negligent in the first place for not having looked into whether there were more videos out there.
And it wasn't like they were slamming adults like you and I and Jeff. They were slamming children. And that's the most heinous thing about it, is that they're going after innocent kids who were just standing there. As you said, they were there for a march against abortion. So that's the thing. And all the people, the notable names on Twitter who were saying some pretty horrendous things, trying to incite violence against these children, their asses are grass.
I mean, they were getting death threats.
They are, these notable names, which there are a lot of them that were on Twitter, a lot of the Hollywood Goon Squad and everybody else, those people are going to be paying some money.
Well, and not only that, but take a step back, and we talked about mental illness, but imagine how just immoral you have to be, just morally bankrupt you've got to be to target children, to ask for private information, as we saw Kathy Griffin do, former CNN commentator, to target them, to target their families. And, I didn't see, even after the school had to shut down because the police intelligence unit there in northern Kentucky had to arrive on station because the school was getting death threats, getting bomb threats, people saying we're going to smash up your cars in the parking lot if you come in. I didn't see any of those single large name accounts on Twitter or anyone in the mainstream media saying, you know what, guys, we may disagree with these kids do, but it's not right to put them through this. We should probably stop this violence and stop these death threats. Did you guys see anyone doing that? Because I sure did.
Absolutely not. And I think that when these lawsuits start hitting and people start having to get into their savings accounts and paying these lawsuits, these settlements, I think it's going to solve a lot of mental illness.
Well, and it was just sad, again, in real time, how this is where we're at. Everybody's so viscerally, extremely tribal They just went with that first original video, and then everybody, not just celebrities, everybody doubled down on it. Like, oh my God, this is so egregious. And that's all you saw for a good couple days. And then when that video that puts it into context finally came out, it was almost like, no, I don't care about that. We want to go with this first official narrative, which we know is false because it confirms our bias and our hatred of whatever, Trump, conservative, whatever it is. And then to couch it all in, these conservative Catholic kids against a Native American. It's like, Jesus Lord, really? Can we get any more cliche?
Well, and the thing is if Soros, some people were saying, and Jack, you can give feedback in a second here on this. If a Soros group is paying Mr. Phillips, the alleged, he called himself a Vietnam era veteran now.
250th
look,
Vietnam veteran.
If Soros is paying him, Mr. Phillips hasn't invested any of the money in teeth. I'll tell you that.
Come on, Patrick.
That is one interesting thing that I picked up and did even mention in my initial report for One American News regarding this was that this individual, I mean, he's not some guy, some random bystander.
He's an
on
activist.
the road, right? This guy had a whole group with him. This is a gentleman who they had cameras already running before he walked over to the students,
right?
And of course, they only released a couple of second snippet of their own footage, but he's got profiles in left-leaning magazines like Vogue, and he was highly involved in the Dakota Access Pipeline protest a few years back, which was something that Soros was very heavily tied into and was actively supporting this. And this is something where Dakota Access Pipeline, I mean, the protest was, the entire pipeline had been built except for this one tiny little bit over a river. I think it was like more of a creek than a river. I actually researched all this. And it wasn't actually on tribal land, but it was sort of down the road from tribal land. But they got people to come in and say that it was part of tribal land, and therefore they couldn't, put the pipeline just through the water, by the way, and not through any of the land or anything like that, because they had already drawn this thing so that it wouldn't encroach on any tribal land, and yet still there's this massive protest to go and stop it. And you have to wonder, what are the financial incentives here driving some of this stuff to maybe put up some of this agitprop that seems really good when it's played out through the media, but when we start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, as they taught us in the intelligence community, and realize that there are ulterior motives, there are ulterior agendas at play.
Always. And so, that's what's so important. Like when we see videos last week, I mean, that whole thing, I'm immediately like, all right, something's afoot here. I mean, doing this show and just a student of history, we're no stranger to false flags and all these kind of, misrepresentations of certain situations. And what better than like in a march like that day, indigenous peoples and whatever, to create some kind of, false narrative situation. And of course it worked beautifully. Everyone
kids were set up. They had no idea what was coming.
It's like you said, man, it's insane that then these kids, and whether you agree with them politically or not, the fact that they're being used as political pawns in the way they have been, and their families are getting death threats, they're getting death threats. I mean, it's off the chain. But again, this to me goes to the larger, they have us divided on all cylinders, man, from religion to politics to sexual orientation to religion. I mean, it's all over the place. And I think they're trying to whip up, me personally, I think they're trying to whip us up into something that a path we don't want to go down as far as civil unrest, et cetera.
That was a big part of the Obama's brand of politics, was divide and conquer.
Right.
You notice that before Obama came into group, we would, sort of have a left and right, and that would be a big disagreement. But under Barack Obama, our politics changed fundamentally in America in ways that I don't even think we've completely yet to come to terms with.
The media was emboldened. Everyone, all the globalists were emboldened.
It was
everybody.
This rise of identity politics to separate people into groups, and then in some cases even smaller groups beyond that, intersectionality, all of these different things that started being thrown at, words that no one had ever heard before, at least in the mainstream sense, all of a sudden started coming out. And it wreaked havoc on our society. And I really do think that Trump's election in a big part was a turn not just against establishment politics, which of course it was, but also a turn against the revolutionary type of almost far left politics that Obama had been orchestrating for all those years.
And I, just respectfully, I probably disagree with you and Pat, right? Because I know you guys are Trump fans, and I'm kind of apolitical. I think both sides are kind of two sides of the same coin. But I think Obama promised the same thing, to be this like fresh breath of fresh air. I'm against normal establishment politics, and he got people in voting by the hundreds, just millions. The turnout for him was just huge, but he wound up being this basically deep state operative. And I think Trump is swung that other way. That pendulum swung the other way. And this is me personally, you know what I mean? He's in the WWE Hall of Fame. I think Donald Trump is the master of the work. And like Jared Kushner said about Donald Trump, I don't think he really cares about the particular white right-wing conservative. He just knows how to speak to them. And I think he rallied that base just like Obama did, but just swung the other direction. And so, I think they're both kind of guilty of their own brand of identity politics, in my humble opinion.
Great.
Go ahead, Jack.
Oh yeah, so no, I think you're absolutely right in terms of a lot of what you have to say there. I mean, and the president himself certainly spoke to that a lot. And sometimes he kind of lampshades it, which is an old theater term for when you're making a highlight of something. Where he said once, he has a lot of support from the evangelical community, but he doesn't think that he deserves it.
It's almost like what Hillary said. They caught her talking to Goldman Sachs, like, I don't really care about these people. I have my public opinion, and then I have my private opinion. I think that's kind of politics 101. These guys are masters at kind of, masters of the work on both sides. They know, everything is so metrics and optics orientated now. Like, they know exactly how to speak to their base in a given electoral area. They talk differently in the Northeast than they do in the South, or that one video of Hillary Clinton like, "Hi y'all," or whatever. That was like, dude, in this peace-smelling woman's reign.
Social media and that's actually one thing that I love about the new brand of social media, of live streaming, and the fact that we are sort of, and that's actually a bigger sort of the meta commentary on the Covington Catholic incident, Covington Gate, is that we are being monitored 24/7, right? It's not necessarily the police state of the government do it, but we're being monitored by one another. And so something happens, specifically in politics, you're going to hear about it, and everyone's going to find out about it all at once. If you think it may just be one little thing in one part of the country, everyone's going to hear about it. So you are actually going to be called to account, and you're going to be required to respond and to interact and to be on call much more than politicians have ever been before. And I actually think that's a good thing, right? I think that's a good thing for both sides of the aisle, because we see corruption on both sides of the aisle. We see corruption at all different levels, state, local, federal. And I think it's good that there's more ways for the democratization of information, which is something I talk about, and more ways for new media and for people that don't necessarily have a network behind them, or, a multinational corporation like Fox or CNN does that they're part of, but are just one person on the side of the road with, right, with a camera, can have that much power. We just watched this, not to get too off on a tangent, but we just watched this new documentary on the Fire Festival, the huge Fire Festival scam. If you don't know what that was, it was this big party, and people were supposed to come down to the Bahamas and pay thousands of dollars to live like Pablo Escobar for the weekend, and it was just the whole thing was a lie. It was just a complete lie. And they'd paid these huge supermodels to do a promo for it, so everyone thought it was real. And then when one guy got there, he took a picture of the food that was served, and it was a white styrofoam container with 2 pieces of bread and a piece of like plastic uncooked cheese on top.
Ooh.
And they said it was amazing. They said this entire festival with $30 million invested into it was defeated by a guy.
So you were supposed to be on a yacht with a bunch of Playboy bunnies, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, I heard about this actually.
Yeah, so let's move on to the last part of the Covington puzzle, which is the bishop, the Catholic Church. Initially, they didn't back these kids at all. They kind of threw them under the bus. And I was raised Catholic, Jack, and I'm not a fan of the Catholic Church. My 2 oldest brothers were molested by a priest. Both of them committed suicide, and they were great men. One was an Air Force pilot. The other one was a millionaire by the time he was 24. And so I'm not a big fan of the Catholic Church, although they have done great things. But the pedophilia and all the other stuff that comes with it, there's a lot of baggage, a lot of horrible baggage. But anyway, this was something where I was not happy the Catholic bishop did not back these kids at all. And then he comes out and says afterward that he was bullied into saying the things. Look, you're a Catholic bishop, man. You're going to allow people to bully you instead of sticking up for these kids. That's garbage.
When that was within the real time, like within 24 hours, too, like the public outcry was such where he had to make that public statement before he could even contextualize the situation, which was like, that's what I'm saying, that the bums rushed to, like, j'accuse these kids was just out of control. There was no, hey, let's pump the brakes a second. Let's see maybe some other angles. It was like that one snippet, like Jack said, just started with the guy coming up, and then.
Snow, what's your thoughts on that, Jack, as far as the Catholic Church not backing these kids initially?
I think it's terrible. I think it's absolutely terrible. It speaks to weak leadership, not only with the church at that local level and that local diocese there in Covington, Kentucky, but also at the national level with the College of Bishops in America, and then all the way to the highest level at the Pope. I mean, I think you're seeing this throughout the Catholic Church. I myself am someone who was raised Catholic school. And, I look at the leadership of the church throughout all the scandals in terms of the covering up for pedophiles, in terms of, not holding elected leaders to the same standards of the church. I mean, people like Pelosi, people like Andrew Cuomo, these are sort of the standard bearers of Catholicism, yet they're mocking Catholicism in terms of their policies, and the church does nothing. And then you got a situation like this, where they're asked to stand up for their own children, by the way.
Right.
And I've had local parents say to me, they said, Jack, because I reached out to sources in the district, in the parish there, and they said, we thought our children were going to a March for Life in Washington along with all of their Catholic leaders, and we didn't think anything could go wrong. And now it feels like we've been victimized twice.
Betrayed, absolutely.
It feels like we've been victimized twice, first by the media, and then again by this bishop.
Yeah. And what's your take on Cernovich? Mike Cernovich has been on our show before, and we've had a lot of fun with him in the past. I knew what he was saying when he made the statements on Twitter where he said, that Christianity, is the cause of all these problems and allowing all these problems to happen. A modest form of Islam would be better served in this country, basically saying Muslims would never have allowed their children to be abused like this by others. They would have stood up and they would have done something about it, was the point that he was trying to make. Is that the way you understood it?
Yeah, actually, I think you're 100% right there. What Mike was doing in a very, Mike Cernovich kind of way is, provoking people.
Right.
Which is what he's the best at, he is the provocateur. He's trying to start a conversation by making you uncomfortable.
Yes.
By making you confront your own preconceived biases. And there's a typical preconceived bias in many Americans and certainly many Christians that, Christianity good, Islam bad, right? That's a preconceived. Obviously, if you're someone who follows a religion, you would consider other religions to not be, as good as your own. That's the point of a religion. But he's trying to point out, using an example, right, using Covington as the example to say, had this happened under Islam, this would have played out very differently.
Would have been a lot of people getting their asses kicked. Is what would have happened most
right,
likely.
And because that's very much an honor culture. It's an honor-based culture,
right.
And in the West today, we've lost sight of that. We've very much lost sight of our honor, of our personal. And they say, where are the parents? Why aren't the parents going after this guy very much? And a lot of the time, the parents that I spoke to, they said, we don't want to cause any trouble. We don't want to upset anybody. And that's the things that were being said to me. Man, if that were my kid, I would definitely have a different reaction. I'll tell you that much.
Right. So, all right. Well, let's jump into maybe a little bit of what's going on in Venezuela. The unfortunate folks down there who have had to eat their own pets and deal with some pretty horrible leadership down there of their own. Things have gone awry, and there's some meddling going on down there with America. America's pretty good at meddling in other countries, and we've certainly been meddling down there a little bit. And what's your take on what's going on? Are we assisting in the implosion of Venezuela? Have we been doing that? Or is it the leaders of that country doing it themselves?
Or a combination of the two?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's actually more of a combination of the two. Everyone, and it's funny, I was actually kind of getting into it on Twitter with Marco Rubio's communications director earlier today over this issue. when I pointed out some basic facts, it's not as cut and dried as saying, oh, Venezuela is communist, and therefore we should, put up the new president. It's not as cut and dried as saying that because America doesn't have the right to just go around the world and saying you're not the legitimate leader of this country anymore, and we're going to recognize somebody else. How would we like it if China came over to the U.S. and said, we recognize Nancy Pelosi as the
well, but wait a minute, Jack. Russia put Trump in. Come on.
Over Russia put Trump. Yeah, see, that's actually a great point, because I hope they know that they're opening themselves up politically and rhetorically for that very much same argument to say, well, if you guys can say it for Venezuela, we should be able to say it for Washington, D.C., right?
Absolutely.
That it's the same thing. And so we also have to realize that a lot of the economic strife that's going on in Venezuela is a result of sanctions that were placed on Venezuela in 2015 by Barack Obama that were then strengthened by Donald Trump. So to say that it's just because of socialism and communism is not exactly the full issue. Again, nobody forced them to continue spending the way they were after the sanctions were put on, and nobody forced them to continue their socialist programs even as the price of oil was falling around the world, right? That's on them. But it's still a more complex issue, and to say America had no role in it would just not be intellectually honest. And so at the same time, to say that America has no role in what's currently going on is we're encouraging other countries to endorse a guy who's essentially kind of like their Speaker of the House. He's the President of the National Assembly. They call it kind of like Speaker of the House, and saying that this is the new president. But at the same time, it's also a people's movement. There's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there.
Well, in addition to like the sanctions, we pretty much started to isolate those guys in like the mid to late 90s when Chavez came in. And then, they're sitting on all this oil and they're kicking out all this foreign investment when they can't refine the oil. So it's like they're just sitting on this oil with really no way to really cash in on it. And then, you're losing money from your oil, and then you hyperinflate, you're starting to print money, which goes into hyperinflation. I mean, it just seems like a kind of weird cycle they've been in. But like you said, there's a huge component of America keeping them, with sanctions and everything else, not doing what exactly they need to be doing.
Well,
but
on top of that, it's a situation of where, and I see people respond sometimes and say, well, Jack, what about fracking? What about the shale? What about the tar sands in Canada? I say, look, yeah, that's fine. But in Venezuela, we're talking about crude oil, right? This is the cheapest oil that you can find, and it's much, much closer, obviously than the Middle East or somewhere else in the world, Russia with the natural gas. So this is much cheaper to get. You don't have to process it the same way you would with anything that's coming out of shale, with anything that's coming out of tar sands. It's dirty, right? It's got to be processed. To simplify it, and so it represents a massive boon for U.S. influence, because obviously the companies that were all kicked out of there by Chavez would very much like to get back in as part of that supply chain, and of course the U.S. company Citgo, that was actually just the one earlier today. They're a subsidiary of the Venezuelan oil company, and so that's what President Trump put massive sanctions on today. So the company Citgo, it's going to be really interesting seeing. I don't know if maybe tomorrow or later this week, depending on how their cash flow goes, but you might see Citgo stations across the United States be shutting down because of U.S. sanctions.
Wow.
I just want to I want it to hit bottom dollar and then invest in it, because it's eventually going to go back up.
It will, regardless of who's that man. Spoken like a true investor, because regardless of who ends up pulling off on this, whether it's Maduro, whether it's Guaido, it's definitely going to go back up.
Well, when you see some of the players involved, I see Elliot Abrams and John Bolton have kind of got into the game, and if Elliot Abrams goes back to kind of the Iran-Contra thing, what are your thoughts on Elliot Abrams and his role in trying to smooth things over down in Venezuela?
I'll just say, given his past history, it wouldn't surprise me if we see, or maybe we won't see it initially, but maybe at some point we find out that there's a group like the Contras that's getting some, U.S. Covert or clandestine support through a CIA operation. This is similar to what happened in Syria. It's similar to what happened in Libya, where the agency had sort of decided, U.S. policy had decided that they wanted to destabilize the region.
Proxy wars.
So they basically created a an operation in Syria. It was called Operation Timber Sycamore, which was a finding authorized by Barack Obama that this sort of rebel force would be trained up by U.S. Intelligence, right, CIA. It was done over in Jordan, and then
would be
then sent into Syria, and that eventually got way out of control, and it turned into ISIS.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
No, I had friends years ago in Jordan training people that they were like, these guys are dirtbags. We know they are. And these guys are former special forces guys, are contractors, and they knew who they were training, and they were regretting even being over there and dealing with that. But
that's been going on for a long time. Let's just be honest. That did not start with Obama.
I think that it was much more diabolical.
Oh no! I'm just saying that's something that's recent. I mean, you can go back to the 1980s and
Reagan
and Afghanistan.
Well, I mean, and then the use of kind of these proxy forces utilized for kind of false flags. This goes back to Operation Gladio. I mean, there's been a huge precedent for this. It's been going on for a long time beyond presidential administrations. What do you? I mean, in the larger global context, man, what's going on in Venezuela? How does that play into, for lack of a better term, the BRIC nations kind of growing more of an allegiance with Russia and China? And how does that play in this grand chessboard? The BRIC nations and what's going on in Venezuela and kind of the Russia, the Eurasian growth of Eurasia, et cetera.
What the BRIC nations are going to say to this, and I say this as someone who I spent 2 years living in Shanghai, China. I speak fluent Mandarin. They're going to they're going to use this as reinforcement to them that the U.S. does not want to get involved with them, is not interested in being a fair player. They're not operating in good faith. That they're going to be using the UN. They're going to be using NATO. They're going to be using all these other organizations, IMF, World Bank, in order to pursue their own interests, and that essentially the quote unquote world system, or you could say the Atlantic system, I've heard that sometimes as well, is set up to favor the United States. And so it's going to reinforce the preconceived notions of the BRICS nations, and for them it's going to reinforce what they believe is their need to set up a system to counter that. And one of the biggest financial and economic drivers of that is going to be the One Belt, One Road system, which is being set up primarily by China. Russia's also a big player in it, though, which is being constructed as we speak as a sort of alternative to the petrodollar.
And we've talked about that a lot on the show, the growth of China, the announcement of the Petro-Chuan, and like the movement of a lot of big nations moving away from the petrodollar.
And do you see America kind of prodding and pushing and funding and getting India to jump in a little bit more as far as trying to slow that down? There's a lot of friction, obviously, between those two nations. I almost feel like India and China could go at it before anybody else goes at it.
Well, part of the road does go through northern India, so
that's
the Kashmir region for sure.
How do you feel about that, Jack?
Yeah, no, India and China. I mean, you're talking about two ancient enemies, two ancient foes. China and Pakistan have a massive political and security, military to military relationship because of this. And so it really starts to become murky when you look at the alliances there, because the U.S. has an alliance with Pakistan, but Pakistan has an alliance, but Pakistan hates India. India hates China, but then Saudis would definitely provide nuclear cover, military cover to Pakistan, which does have nuclear forces. So Saudis could move their army in if there were any type of situation. And so I mean, you look at the potential proxies that could spill out of that, and it's really scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it was several months ago that one of my friends, who's a former Special Forces guy, he and I were talking, and he said, dude, we're pretty much finished with the Middle East. We're heading to South America. We're going to start destroying everything down there. And it's happening. I mean, it's happening. Venezuela,
we're heading back, actually, in a sense, really.
Well, I mean, we're seeing some of the terrorist activity in Syria, trying to drag us back in, right? Almost trying to throw those fish hooks out and catch us as we're trying to leave.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see some of this. I saw this one. There was an unfortunate terrorist attack in Manbij, Syria, where 4 U.S. service members were killed, two men, 2 women. I think 2 were interpreters. and the other guy, the two guys were special forces, or one was a ranger.
Scotty Wirtz was the name of one.
He lived in St. Louis.
Former SEAL team.
Works, right? That's right. And he had been a
former SEAL Team 6, and he was good friends with a lot of the guys that I know.
Yeah. So people knew who he was. He was a known commodity. But what was interesting is that city had not seen a lot of ISIS attacks in recent time, and had actually been more focused on the Turkish-based rebels and Turkish intelligence, as well as a sort of a meeting point. It looked like what was happening was that was a source meet with some Kurds that had gone wrong. There had been a compromise at some point along the way. One of the interpreters there was, fluent in actually the Kurdish dialect of Arabic, and so you can kind of read between the lines what was going on there. And so it really struck me as interesting that ISIS would attack there, since ISIS territory is very, very far from Manbij.
Right. That's what we had on journalist Eva Bartlett not too long ago, and she's been boots on the ground.
She's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. She's actually over there now. I think she might be heading back to Iceland or Canada, but yeah, been very.
I pray for her all the time.
I told her last time I had her on. She said she was going. I'm like, man, I worry about you. And then when that bomb happened, I'm like, hey, where are you at? And she was far away from it. But I knew when we said that we were pulling out, I'm like, this is going to bring in more Israel. This is going to bring in more ISIS. It's going to bring in more Turkey. And we'll see how that plays out. But kind of rewinding just a little bit, I mean, because these proxy wars are literally happening everywhere. And I think, obviously South America is a huge part of it because of the BRIC nation stuff. And then what's going on kind of Eurasia. We just saw the other day, a Muslim blew up 2 bombs in a Catholic church or something like that. And this was in Indonesia. And then we saw ISIS moving into the Philippines. See, this to me reeks of a problem reaction solution, because oftentimes we fund these bad guys to then go in and be like, oh, now we got to have a presence in there to stop these bad guys. What do you think as we talk about, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and then, the growth of these trade deals, the growth of One Belt, One Road, and then you see these incidents starting to happen in that region, which to me would almost necessitate down the line an American presence. What do you think about that larger strategy?
It's to put it this way. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a hodgepodge. I mean, I say this as someone who's been in the intelligence community and someone who's looked at it also from other levels. But I think that in many cases, at the very, very ground level, that we just don't know. In some cases, we don't know what our own government is doing. We don't know what other governments are doing. Who's who in the zoo is a great line for it. You don't know. One thing that a former Philippines analyst used to tell me that had done a few tours down there in the southern part of the Philippines, and going up against the MNLF and the MILF, and said actually, they act as if there's so many different groups down here, but in many cases, when you follow it in terms of individuals, you realize that a lot of them are the same individuals. It's just one day they're working for this group, then one day they're working for another group. It's like they put on a different hat, but it's the same people that are moving back and forth and playing both sides against the middle, because the guys on the ground know what's going on, and they know that they're trying to be influenced by these greater powers or other organizations. And so they're playing both sides against each other. Or in other cases, you find people that just, they're just in it for the money, other people that are in it for the mayhem. And so when we start going down that road as a country, or I don't even know if it's the best way to use it, because when we continue to go down that road as a country, we've been doing so for such a long time, that it leads to more of these situations that always turn into quagmires, that always turn into issues, that always have secondary and tertiary issues that we haven't thought of. And our answer is to just do more of it instead of ever to take a step back and say, maybe there were things we could have done originally that would have, would have not set this in motion.
Mitigated some of the downsides of some of this stuff. But it seems like, the ends just seem to justify the means in this kind of global hegemony, or however it plays out, General Wesley Clark, however many years ago, saying like X amount of countries in X amount of years. So, I mean, this chessboard's been set up for quite a while, and it seems like there's really no end. We got Iran now playing, a role, and it's just that it's such a mess over there. And then obviously we have Russia and China, so it's like we got the plate full, man. Something I wanted to ask you, and Pat and I talk about often, man. This Mueller investigation is just absolutely insane. Worst case scenario, they're saying Trump colluded with Russia and Putin, et cetera, et cetera. But, Pat and I have had people on the show, and it goes way, way deeper than that. Not to go too much into it, but what are your thoughts on, this QAnon? QAnon is supposedly, this narrative that Trump's actually, this is 4D chess and he's really got everybody where he wants them, et cetera, et cetera. What validity do you give to QAnon?
Yeah, so I actually knew the guys, or I should say the group of guys that started QAnon back when it was on 4chan, and they kind of came up with the idea for it. And so QAnon was something that came along in the line of 4chan used to have these posters called FBI Anon, CIA Anon, and you never kind of knew whether it was real or not, right? Well, the guys who came up with QAnon said that, and there were just a couple of guys who posted on 4chan regularly, and they said they wanted to come up with something that people could really rally around and use it as a way to share information or to package, different narratives in a different way to, kind of catch a bigger audience. And so they started posting as QAnon. And then, what can I say? The thing really took off. And then they kind of backed out. The people that I knew who were running it kind of backed out early on. One of them is up on Twitter now. His name is Dreamcatcher Q, and he's done a lot of interviews recently. But then it moved over to another message board called 8chan.
8chan, yeah.
Where another group of people kind of took over it, and it really, really caught on there.
Well, see, and that's kind of people's knock on it. Like, I started believing in, people are saying, they were with the 4chan, and then somehow that got, that people say, co-opted or taken down, and then 8chan came in, and it wasn't exactly the same. So it's that's kind of people's gripe. It's well, I don't know the veracity of this this Q, because it was this group.
There's definitely been different groups of people posting as QAnon.
So this notion that QAnon was some Q security level clearance is not accurate. I don't even know if that exists. Q level access, or you know what I mean?
So Q security clearance is a Department of Energy security clearance, which gives you special access or sensitive access to nuclear infrastructure, nuclear
transport and.
Yeah, transport, all that kind of stuff. So, right in the name, right, the Q clearance wouldn't grant you any access to the stuff that QAnon is talking about.
So this notion that he's, this is a deep sting with him and Mueller, and he's going to uncover the child sex rings and, these deep underground shadow economies and, trading in drugs and people and body parts and all these, do you believe that this is some big white hat move by Trump, or is he, is he in deep with, the deep state? Not in deep together, but he's, they just indicted Roger Stone. I mean, obviously this has nothing to do with collusion, but they keep, squeezing him to make people talk.
It's all process crimes, though, which is
right. It has
driving me insane.
Right. But this notion of Q and Trump colluding, and they, this is a sting against the deep state with Mueller. Do you give any credence to that?
I don't really, because I've just never seen. I mean, put it this way, even though the fact that I knew the guys that started it originally, put that aside, because they told me as they were doing it.
Was it more of a LARP with those guys, or were they legitimately trying to, because people are saying everything he said's been correct, and look at he's predicted this and that. Was it a LARP, or were they really trying to spin some information?
Well, I mean, they didn't have any special access or any actual ties to the administration.
Right. Okay.
Other than having, I think volunteered on the campaign. But in terms of saying, the stuff where Hillary Clinton's going to be locked up, and
right?
All these indictments coming, and
yes,
this and that's going to happen. Whereas when things do happen in the real world, it always seems that, and I have followed this because I'm interested in what's going on, and people have brought it up to me. But you never see Q have any kind of foreknowledge of anything that Trump's about to announce, or any of the positive things that he does, that would fit into their narrative.
Right.
They never seem to tell anyone about that. They always kind of are behind the curve. So then Trump tweets something, or there's an article that comes out, and then they act as if they knew it was.
Well, and that's whatever happens, it's always, hey, trust the plan, trust the plan. I know it looks bad, just trust the plan.
I have a little joke. I say, trust the flan. Trust the flan.
Well, is Q? Is it designed to mobilize the people into becoming more bold? Is that really what the bigger picture is with Q?
So initially, yeah, and I actually did an interview with one of the gentlemen who was the originator of this idea. The idea was this, mobilize people, get them together, have them interested in something again, and sort of best intentions, but also that it went way further than they ever thought it would. It became way bigger than they ever thought it would, and making promises that there was no possible way to deliver on. And so that's one reason that they came to me and they said, Jack, can you use your platform? Can you use One American News to help us speak out that this was never intended to be where it is today?
Well, I've always called it hope porn. This as a very sophisticated psyop resulting in hope porn, making people think like one day this and I would love for it to be true and for a lot of this darkness to be removed, because it's just absolutely insane. You're no stranger to Gitmo, and a part of this whole narrative is like they've opened up Gitmo and they've expanded Gitmo for trials against sedition and treason, and you know anything about that? Have you heard anything about Gitmo being expanded to start doing?
Oh yeah, no, it's I kind of think of it as like an ongoing fan fiction. It's like Trump fan fiction, or like this sort of mythology. If you read it as like an alternate reality, it's interesting looking at it. But I mean, they've gone so far, and they believe. So ever since I did my report, they've come out and then said that, oh well, Jack is just saying that because he's an Israeli Mossad agent, and that's why Jack is saying these things.
Well, and wow. I think a part of this divide and conquer is it's dividing basically the conservative kind of alt-right group. You have within that group of conservatism, you have people who've just die-hard Q followers and people who are having this conversation like, maybe not so much. So even within that, there's a divide and conquer going on. I find.
Yeah, I mean, I've always just been a conservative, and the whole online world is something that didn't really exist for me, at least politically, until 2016, and just seeing the way that it's expanded beyond that, that initial support of Trump, like I was involved in, it's been incredible, and there's been some amazing things that have come out of it. There's also been some terrible things that have come out of it, and I think we all know what those are. But you get everything in between too.
Right.
And so basically, is there any hope of anything ever happening with the illegal spying on Trump? The FISA, the fake dossier that was put together. all of these actors that were involved in this garbage.
The weaponization of the FBI, the Justice Department,
the IRS,
media.
all of it.
Yeah.
Man. I mean, Lois Lerner, she got a retirement. She skated. John Koskinen. You talk about wanting to punch someone in the face watching that guy give his testimony. I tell you what, that's a condescending little prick.
Well, Comey, Bruce Orr, Nellie Orr, GPS, or Fusion GPS, the whole thing.
So, I mean, there's got to be at some point, if there's any justice in this world left at all, some of these people have got to go down. Am I correct?
So what's interesting in looking at all of this is you've seen at this point, firings, and you've seen sort of like one-off investigations into one player here or one player there, regarding their personal conduct, like Peter Strzok or Andrew McCabe, James Comey, have all been fired. But, Bruce Orr is still at the DOJ. Right. A lot of the people that were involved in this are still
right.
working there.
Rod Rosenstein. Well, and the mass resignations, that was supposedly part of like, John Ryan, all of them are getting out of there before the shite hits the fan. So what are your thoughts on like so many of these mass resignations that have gone down over the last year or so?
Well, I mean, if there was, and this is a big thing that a lot of people, coming at it from a lay perspective are looking at. I mean, even if someone resigns from an agency, that doesn't protect you from, criminal culpability. If you've
right.
committed criminal acts, and
right.
they can investigate you. So, I mean, you could resign and it doesn't matter.
Doesn't protect you. Okay.
They could still go after you. But unfortunately, people have propped up these things like the IG report. And I remember that was a big thing with QAnon.
Yes.
Was the IG report.
Horowitz.
The IG report. And I kept trying to explain to people that an inspector general's report, it can't really do anything on its own. I mean, they have certain, I guess, personnel HR ability, and they can certainly recommend certain things. But they're even constrained in the way that they're able to conduct investigations. I mean, one of the big examples of that was they couldn't even request records that weren't on government devices. So they were looking at, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and the Orrs, but they couldn't even request documents from their personal cell phones, personal, text messages there, or personal email accounts. They couldn't get those. So it's a very different kind of investigation. than a sweeping counterintelligence investigation or a criminal investigation.
And you being former intelligence, I mean, am I correct in saying that the NSA already has the 33,000 emails that Hillary Clinton deleted? Am I correct?
I would be surprised if they didn't in some way, shape, or form.
So, I mean, at some point, are those going to turn up?
You never know. I mean, it's obviously come out that certainly China had access to her server, that the illegal server that was set up in her house that had highly classified information on it. The Russians probably have a copy. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel has a copy.
WikiLeaks.
You don't hear much about that, do you?
That's the interesting thing, actually. It seems like WikiLeaks is the only people in all of this that didn't have a copy of her personal server, right? As opposed to the John Podesta or the DNC server.
So Seth Rich never had that, is what you're saying.
He wasn't the source. He wasn't the source
well,
of
if anything.
Okay. I mean, that's part of the narrative. Seth Rich was killed because he was the one who leaked to WikiLeaks.
And that was an interesting theory that a lot of people brought up, and something that, unfortunately, the murder has never been solved even.
Right.
And basically people are being scared away from even trying to dive into it, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, massive pressure put on anybody, that goes into this, whether it be local news. I mean, even D.C. local news, like the local Fox affiliate had tried to look into this and tried to request records, and they had massive pressure put against them. People were pressuring the D.C. mayor at one point, and she completely refused to even release. That says a lot,
body
cam footage.
And the chief,
why not release the body cam footage?
Exactly.
The chief resigned not long after Seth Rich's murder, and that investigation started up. Am I correct?
The chief ended up getting a job as the head of NFL security.
Interesting, but it was the timing of it was very suspicious. That he just and she and we had on one of the lawyers that was representing the plaintiffs against the DNC in the fraud case, and they had Seth was one of their witnesses. He drops dead. Another guy by the name of Sean Lucas, I believe, was one of their witnesses and dropped dead. So there was a lot of shady stuff going on. And
the way they're protecting the investigation tells me that they had something to do with something big.
Well, right, and the fact that we know for a fact that W. Wasserman Schultz and the DNC committed federal election fraud and stealing of the nomination, and we just don't hear about it. The page has been turned. And
that's actually one of the things. So Roger Stone, gets indicted last week,
right.
And he gets 29 agents show up at his house, and all of it's for questions that they asked him regarding his communications to WikiLeaks, who released the emails. And all of it comes back to, and I just keep wanting to say, are we going to stop talking about how the emails were released and actually start talking about what was in the content of the email?
Right.
Can we ever do that?
Right.
What they did to Bernie, and all the stuff that Hillary was doing. My goodness.
That makes too much darn sense, Jack.
Poor Bernie. Got a new house and everything.
I know. And he's going to run again, him and Hillary. Like, really? Is that the move, guys? I mean, especially Hillary. You're going to run again. How desperate. I mean, come on, man.
If she can walk by then. Walk.
Oh, sweet
Doing
Mary.
the Clinton shuffle.
Right, exactly.
Well, Jack, we don't want to take up too much more of your time, man. It's been a pleasure to not only meet you, but talk to you.
Absolutely.
And pick your brain a little bit. Very intelligent guy. We enjoy following you on Twitter and certainly fill in our listeners on how they can get in touch with you, how they can follow you on social media and other places.
Sure. So the best place to pick up my reporting is One America News. We're available within the U.S. on Dish as well as Fios and on Roku. If you have that online, we're available on Roku and Cloud TV, Cloud with a K. And then, of course, our YouTube page, One America News, OANN.com. And then on Twitter, I'm Jack Posobiec, Posobiec. And you can see I'm a pretty heavy Twitter user there.
Yes, sir, you are. Well, Jack, thank you very much for being here. For my broadcast partner, Jeffrey Wilson, this has been another episode of The Conspiracy Farm, and we are out of here.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir. That was awesome, dude. Great job.
That was fun. That was great.
Yeah, we love that.